Dateline Sunday, they're serving their time, but are women inmates being forced to face sexual abuse? One officer comes forward to tell his story.
Male guards, female prisoners. Does it lead to sexual abuse? A former corrections officer speaks out next on Dateline NBC.
This is Dateline Sunday. November 1st, 1998. Tonight. She says she was abused by a man who was paid to watch over her.
He made my worst nightmares come true.
Women victimized sexually in a place where they can't get away. One man describes how he did it.
I says, I'll meet you in the bathroom, otherwise I'll write you up.
And she complied with this?
Women in prison being forced to do more than serve their time.
They would tell me how they liked it.
How they liked what?
Sex.
Critics call it a human rights disaster.
You've got more women in prison, more men guarding them, and nobody minding the store.
Chris Hansen on what can happen when men guard women.
I felt like I had the power.
A Dateline investigation. Dateline with Jane Pauley and Stone Phillips, plus Tom Brokaw, Katie Couric, and Maria Shriver. From Studio 3B in Rockefeller Center, here is Jane Pauley.
Good evening. It can leave you damaged for life. Just ask women who've been through it. Sexual abuse often takes place because women feel like they're in a situation they simply can't escape. But what if that was literally true? What if the women in jeopardy are locked up and the men who abuse them are their guards? Tonight, how some women say the very laws designed to protect women may be the laws putting them at risk. Here's Chris Hansen with a Dateline investigation.
Ladies, introduce yourselves.
He says if I don't do what he wants, he's gonna make my life, miserable in here.
Left, right, left.
He just told me, stay in there and let me look at you.
He made my worst nightmares come true.
People want to know.
It's indescribable.
March!
What is indescribable, the women say, is the abuse they suffered at the hands of men. Men who were paid by the government to watch over them. The women were inmates at prisons and jails across the country, run by counties, states, even the federal government. They admit they deserve to be there, to pay their debt to society for the crimes they committed. But they say their sentence did not include sexual abuse and exploitation at the hands of male corrections officers.
I'll just have one more.
Officers like Lyle Baker, who says that when he caught two inmates breaking the rules, he considered it an opportunity.
I caught two female inmates kissing in a mess hall. I sent the one back, and I told the other one, I says, meet you in the bathroom, we can go in there and, we'll have oral sex or whatever, and then otherwise I'll write you up. And I said, I'll make your ticket look good, and I said, you'll never get out of lock.
And she complied with this?
She complied with it. She didn't want no troubles.
How did you feel about yourself after that first experience?
I felt like I had the power, like, oh, that was all right. I had control of the woman instead of a woman trying to get control of me.
No one would argue that Lyle Baker is typical of all male corrections officers in female prisons. And as you'll see later, he has a surprising personal reason for talking about this. But some human rights advocates believe Baker is a textbook example of a problem that prison officials throughout the country have not done enough to prevent.
You've got more women in prison, more men guarding them, and nobody minding the store. It's in essence a disaster waiting to happen.
Dorothy Thomas co-authored a report on sexual abuse in U.S. women's prisons for the group Human Rights Watch, which spent 2.5 years investigating women's prisons in 11 states.
How would you describe the situation in the typical women's state prison today?
In essence, a highly sexualized, often very hostile environment in which all kinds of inappropriate sexual conduct are occurring and very little steps are being taken to do anything about it.
The United Nations is now investigating whether women's prisons in this country are violating international law. And the U.S. Department of Justice is suing the states of Michigan and Arizona for failing to protect female inmates from sexual abuse. Charges both states deny. During a 6-month Dateline investigation, we reviewed hundreds of pages of documents and interviewed dozens of inmates, advocates, and prison officials across the country. It would be unfair to suggest that only male officers are capable of abuse, or that female inmates never make false allegations or seek to trade sex for contraband or special treatment. But putting male officers in close contact with female inmates has created significant problems and risks. And we found that in many cases, there are not sufficient safeguards to ensure that someone like Lyle Baker will be quickly caught and punished.
How many women inmates do you figure you had sex with?
At least 7.
7?
At least.
You had a reputation for doing this.
Yep, my name went around.
And a supervisor never talked to you?
Nope, not one.
This is the state prison where Lyle Baker worked for 6.5 years, Albion Correctional Facility in upstate New York, one of the largest women's prisons in the country. Albion made headlines 2 years ago when Amy Fisher, infamous for her affair with a mechanic named Joy Buttafuoco and for shooting Buttafuoco's wife, charged that 5 Albion officers had raped her. Fisher sued prison officials. Last year, a federal judge ruled that many of her charges were not credible. It also said there are indications that all is not right at Albion. Prison officials say they've worked to address those problems, and they granted us extensive access to the facility.
So this is our mess hall down here.
Approximately 1,400 women are serving time here for everything from theft to murder. It may look like a campus, but this is a medium security prison. Inmates are closely supervised, and 4 out of 5 of the officers guarding them are men.
Okay.
There are some things that male officers are not allowed to do,
Change it? Yes, I am.
like strip searching inmates or supervising medical exams. Still, it is mostly men who watch the inmates while they're working, and men who watch them while they're eating.
Ladies, get ready for count.
It is mostly men who make rounds past what are essentially their bedrooms, and men who are responsible for the security of the bathroom and the shower areas.
Were you acting accordingly?
Officers have a lot of authority. Their direct orders must be obeyed.
L2. Why don't you stand over here against this pole for a few minutes? Let me see what I'm going to do with you. Okay, just stand over there.
A disciplinary report written by an officer could cause an inmate to lose her work assignment.
She's probably going to get it if she does do it.
Be locked in a cell 23 hours a day, or even lose a chance at parole.
Do your top button and also your cuff buttons.
Male officers also pat frisk female inmates. This New York State training film demonstrates proper pat frisk procedure. Notice how this officer presses his hands against this inmate's body, probing under her breasts and between her thighs, looking for hidden weapons, drugs, or other contraband. Because many female inmates have histories of sexual abuse, a federal court ruled that pat frisking by male officers was cruel and unusual punishment in a Washington state prison. But in New York and many other states, the procedure is permitted.
They start from your shoulders.
But not all officers pat frisk by the book, according to Kathy TCAP, a convicted robber with prior prostitution convictions. She spent 2 years at Albion and says one officer in particular would grope her and other inmates.
When he starts, he'll go and like this and around.
This is one specific guard.
Right.
At Albion.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't anybody ever complain?
They complain, they write him up, they grieve him and everything.
But he's still there, still on the job.
He's still there. Nothing happened.
Back to the dorms around 10 o'clock.
Ann Janelle Andrews, the superintendent of Albion, says she assigns supervisors to observe pat frisks whenever she hears complaints like those of Kathy TCAP.
You have a double locker.
But Andrews says she receives very few complaints from inmates about pat frisks in particular, or sexual misconduct in general.
I think it's important that everyone recognize that Albion is not a sex-crazed institution.
As a woman, as a superintendent of a prison facility, are you comfortable with male corrections officers pat frisking female inmates here?
Yes, as long as they're performing it in a professional manner, as they're trained by the department.
But Kathy TCAP says an improper pat frisk is not the only thing that happened to her at Albion. Once, while she was working in the prison kitchen, she discovered that a male officer had followed her into a supply closet.
And by the time I heard the door close, he was masturbating in front of me. He just told me, stand there and let me look at you.
Stand there and let me look at you.
I didn't know what to do. I froze.
She says she never reported the incident because she didn't want any trouble. She was 21 years old when she first came to Albion, far from home, lonely, a ripe target for someone like Lyle Baker. Baker was just a few years out of the Corrections Officers Academy when he transferred from a men's prison to Albion in 1989. He says he had gone through a bitter divorce and felt that women were always trying to use him. Working at Albion provided a way to get even.
We're here now. It's like, now it's my turn. You know, I'm in control.
His training failed to change that attitude, and neither did the prospect of being reported and investigated.
To me, you're going to have to get a picture of me actually having intercourse with this inmate to prove it. Otherwise, it's my word against hers.
Why do you think it was that you never got caught?
I knew the system. I knew when I could do it. I knew when the sergeants were going to make rounds.
Ready?
But there was one thing Lyle Baker had not counted on: Kathy Tsekas.
And I seen her there. She's a very attractive woman. And I says, hey, you want to start some rumors? I said, let's go for a ride.
What he did would change their lives forever and outrage Lyle's fellow officers.
The man took an oath to do something and do the right thing, and he violated it. He violated us.
When we come back, the twist of fate that's making Lyle Baker speak out now, and why he didn't see anything wrong with what he was doing at the time.
In a way, I was making them building up their character.
Building up their character?
Yeah.
Dateline NBC, winner of 9 National Headliner Awards, more than any other news magazine. The year's most honored news magazine, Dateline. We'll be right back. From our studios in New York, here is Stone Phillips.
Returning to our story, prison guard Lyle Baker says he had sex repeatedly with female inmates on his watch. But is his story credible? Just how common is sexual abuse of inmates behind prison walls? And what is Lyle Baker's motivation for coming forward now? Chris Hansen continues our Dateline investigation.
As outrageous as it sounds, Corrections Officer Lyle Baker saw nothing wrong about having sex with female inmates.
To me, it was almost like consensual because she was wanting it just as bad as, you know, as I was.
Why, because she didn't say no and fight you off?
Yeah. That's the way I felt at that time. To the way I felt at that time, in my mind, it was. Because she was lonely, I was, you know.
Yeah, but she also knew that you could make her life a living hell.
Yeah.
If she turned you down.
Correct.
But Baker says he only threatened an inmate once. After that, he just preyed on their vulnerability.
I treated them like they were somebody.
You make it sound like you were working in some singles bar as a bartender or something, not as a prison guard.
It was easier for me to pick up a woman in there than out on the street.
And he says he knew exactly where to take the inmates for sex. Stairwells, supply rooms, even staff bathrooms.
In a way, I was making them building up their character.
Building up their character?
Yeah. They're in jail, they had a rough life, say their father is beating them, raping them, whatever. You know, I'm telling them, you know, you're a good-looking woman, you know, why are you in here?
But you're only doing that to have sex with them.
Correct.
You didn't think that was some form of abuse?
No. Only thing on my mind was myself getting even with a woman. And that's exactly what I did.
Prison officials say that they are not aware of any complaints about Lyle Baker and find it hard to believe he could have done what he claims without getting caught. But the question is, why even put male officers in such close contact with female inmates? The United States is one of the few countries that does, according to Dorothy Thomas of Human Rights Watch.
In many countries of the world, men are kept out of the women's prisons precisely because the authorities understand the risk of abuse. In the United States, men are allowed in the women's prisons because of our equal employment laws.
Equal employment laws, and in the case of Albion, union rules that award jobs based on seniority and prevent the superintendent from simply hiring more female officers.
So to anybody who says, hey, look, they can get more female corrections officers if they wanted to, you would say...
I would love it.
These Albion corrections officers don't think men guarding women is a problem, and they are outraged that Lyle Baker has tarnished their image.
I'll meet you in the bathroom, we can go in there and, you know, have oral sex or whatever, and then otherwise I'll break write you up. And I said, I'll make it ticket look good. And I said, you'll never get out of lock.
If he wants to brag to everyone that that's what he's doing, there's definitely something wrong with that man.
What we've seen on that screen is not the norm.
You know, we're responsible people. People like Lyle Baker, they make us look bad.
All right, ladies, take it out.
In fact, the officers say that they are all well aware that having sex with inmates would make it nearly impossible for them to do their jobs.
I think the best line I heard was the first day I walked into Albion. If you have sex with one of them, you better be prepared to have sex with all of them, because they're all going to own you. Because that's where the manipulation comes in, that's where the blackmail comes in.
This officer says an inmate threatened to falsely accuse him of sexual misconduct if he didn't look the other way when she broke prison rules.
Just try to make things tough for me.
You believe that the proper checks and balances are in place?
Yes.
Do you think that more should be done?
I don't know what more could be done, to be honest. We just don't see it, and none of us would tolerate it.
But if Lyle Baker had sex with 7 female inmates in the course of 6 to 7 years, what does that say about the system of oversight at Albion, that nobody ever caught him?
I don't think he's credible.
He said it was easy. He said, you know, you could just sneak off into a restroom or a work area or...
We find that all funny because you're never alone.
Never alone?
It's almost impossible. It borders on impossible.
But it isn't impossible, according to dozens of current and former inmates across the country who told Dateline that there are ample opportunities for abuse. Ellie Cruz, who served time for prescription fraud, says it all began with sexually explicit talk in a California jail yard.
They would tell me how they liked it and what they wanted to do, and that
How they liked what?
sex, what they liked to do, and what they would do to me, and I had to stand there and listen to it.
At this jail in Osceola County, Florida, Tanya Ross, who served time for drug and prostitution charges, says she was pressured to have oral sex with 4 different officers over a 2-month period, even though she was pregnant at the time.
I know I committed crimes in the past, and I was there to do my sentence, but that was not part of my sentence, to take and perform oral sex with the officers.
And one of the most common things women told us is that they faced retaliation by officers if they complained. Take the case of Robin Lucas, an aspiring basketball player who served time for bank fraud. She says that when she reported misconduct by an officer in this federal prison in Dublin, California, the officer retaliated by allowing 3 men, presumably male inmates, into her cell at night.
Before I could struggle, I was restrained and put in handcuffs behind my back. It was a lot of profanity, lots of punches. Solid punches.
They raped you?
They sodomized me.
What were they saying to you that night?
You're gonna keep your mouth quiet. Shut up.
So far, no one has been prosecuted in any of these cases. The officers accused deny the charges and say the women are lying. But some of the officers accused did resign.
It's been a long struggle.
In Robin Lucas's case, the Justice Department says its investigation found inconsistent and insufficient evidence that she was raped. When Lucas and 2 other inmates sued the Federal Bureau of Prisons, it admitted no wrongdoing, but agreed to pay $500,000 and make changes in the way it handles complaints of sexual misconduct. And what about Lyle Baker's misconduct? We couldn't track down all the female inmates he claimed to have had sex with. In fact, one we did find denied Baker's claims. Another inmate has since died, but a friend of hers from prison confirmed that that inmate did in fact have sex with Baker behind bars. Both women we spoke to said they were well aware of Baker's reputation. And so was Kathy TCAP, who met Lyle Baker while she was working in Albion's mess hall.
He said, come on, let's go start some rumors.
And I says, hey, you want to start some rumors? I said, let's go for a ride. Because I used to deliver food around in a big truck.
How close did you and Lyle get?
We got intimate, real close. We had sex.
You had a sexual relationship?
Yes.
In the prison?
Mm-hmm.
Never got caught?
No, never got caught.
And a lot of people are going to see the story and say, wait a minute, how could this possibly go on in a prison?
It goes on. It goes on.
Lyle Baker's no longer working at Albion, not because he was caught having sex with inmates. In fact, he was never even reprimanded for that. He was forced to resign in 1996 because he married an inmate after she was released. That inmate is none other than Kathy TCAP. A corrections officer is not supposed to consort with a former inmate, even if that inmate is his lawfully wedded wife.
I had to go to jail to find the person I love.
You truly believe that?
Yeah.
They portray it as being a Romeo and Juliet story. We met behind bars, under candlelit skies, and it's disgusting. The man took an oath. The man took an oath to do something and do the right thing, and he violated it. He violated us.
Ready?
Kathy TCAP ended up back in prison. She violated parole by traveling outside of the United States with Lyle. And Lyle? Last time we saw him, he was working odd jobs and hoping that other officers didn't do to his wife what he says he did to so many inmates.
Why are you speaking out about this? You're confessing to some things that don't say a lot about your character back then.
Back then, my character was bad. And now it's almost like I'm trying to warn these guys, the younger ones, 25, 20, even some of the older ones.
Some people are going to see this and say, well, he's pretty self-righteous now that it's his wife in there.
Yeah. Only thing I can say is it happened. Males should not work with female inmates.
But in the end, is getting rid of male officers really the answer? Not according to Human Rights Watch, which is calling for better training and monitoring of prison staff, independent investigation of complaints, and criminal prosecution of officers like Lyle Baker.
Should you have been punished for what you did, having sex with those 7 inmates?
Yeah, what I did, it wasn't right. But there ain't nothing I can do now. All I can say is it's going to happen again.
Since we completed our story, Kathy TCAP has been paroled, and she and Lyle Baker are now living in upstate New York. New York now has a law making it a crime for corrections officers to have sex with inmates under any circumstances. According to Amnesty International, all but 8 states have a similar law.